On Easter morning, we always tell one of the Easter stories. It could come from one of the four Gospels, any one of the four Gospels. I'm going to take mine from John's Gospel. In chapter 20, here's the story. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. She ran to Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out, and they went to the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down and to look in, and he saw the linen wrappings lying there. He did not go in. Simon Peter came, following him, and he went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying in the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place all by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and he believed. For as yet they did not understand the scriptures that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting there where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They've taken away the Lord. I don't know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned, and she saw Jesus standing. She didn't know who it was. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've laid him. I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me yet, because I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father, your Father, to my God, your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that which he had said to tell them. The story begins this morning, I like to begin it, with Mary Magdalene walking in the early morning dew to the place where Jesus was buried. It's not a plot of ground like we would do here. It was a hewn out cave of limestone rock. The stone covering the entrance was formidable, but it was rolled away. Mary didn't look in at this point, according to John's gospel record. She didn't pause. She ran back to Peter and John, telling them that somebody, she didn't say who, she didn't know who, had taken Jesus' body away. And we do not know where they have laid him. And I'll suggest to you that the "we" here is that there were other women who were with her at that time. But when told, there's a foot race between John and Peter to the tomb. The odds are in John's favor. And yes, he gets there first. But he waits, and Peter enters first. They find it empty, as Mary suggested. And while the other disciples who entered and believed, we are not quite sure what that disciple actually believed. Most likely he believed Mary's interpretation of what happened, not that Jesus was actually resurrected. You see, they went home puzzling over who would want to take the body out of the tomb, and why had they left the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had covered his head rolled up in a separate place from the rest of the linens. Mysteries, the unknown. They needed the time to think. But Mary needed something more. An unfinished mourning required knowing where Jesus' body was. I think of the years when I was in high school, and each night Walter Cronkite chronicled the number of soldiers who had died in Vietnam. Then he would list the missing in action. I don't know, but I think the families of the latter group must have had the harder time, not knowing, the uncertainty. In Mary's case, we need to keep in mind all that Jesus has done for her. From Luke's description, she has issues, probably emotional, physical, mental illnesses. He describes her as having 7 devils. We can only imagine the hard life she might have had. But somehow, Jesus brought healing and wholeness to her. As a friend, as a rabbi, as a healer, she found in Jesus someone who not only cared, but taught a truth that was worth living. In Jesus, she found hope and a personal sense of value for who she was as a person. To lose that guy, that presence, that was very huge for her. She wanted to honor him in death, anoint his body as was the custom, but there was no body. And so having followed Peter and John back to the tomb, she stayed alone in her sorrow. Don't you wonder what's going through Mary's head when now, as she looks into the tomb, she sees two angels? It's curious, all that is not said here. But we are to understand, while she seems to take it all in, it's as if she really only hears the question and responds again. Just as she first blurted out to Peter and John, they've taken away the Lord's body, and I don't know where they've laid him. She looked away, and she sees who she supposes, the gardener. And as he too asks her why she's weeping, he asks the second question, who are you looking for? And she makes her plea to him. At this point, he says her name, Mary. The inner longing is answered, for in the way in which her name is said, she hears his voice again. She knows, she recognizes, and she believes. Now, while the story of Mary Magdalene and the other disciples at the empty tomb on that first Easter may seem a little strange to you, I think in a way, it really is your story too. After all, like them, you come here to this mystery, this wonder that we call Easter. Like them, you may not know exactly what you believe about all of this. You may have questions, just like they did. Like Mary Magdalene, you may not know for sure who Jesus is. I believe that John has told this story so artfully, with so much detail, in order that it might become your story as well. As Eugene Peterson writes, one of the first things we might note is that however many resurrections and resurrection hints there may have been in the ancient Jewish and Roman world preceding this, when resurrection actually happened, it took all those who were closest to the event totally by surprise. Whatever happened at the tomb, in the darkness before sunrise, it was not in continuity with or comparable to anything with which we are familiar. Whatever happened that took place just could not be explained in some sort of psychological event that arose in the human imagination or in some kind of collective hysteria. No one did anything to prepare for what actually happened. The two Jewish religious groups at the time who worked diligently to prepare for the resurrection, the Pharisees and the Essenes, missed the resurrection of Jesus totally. This should show us just how having more biblical or theological education or insight doesn't make the resurrection any easier to comprehend. And trust me, I can attest to this. All we have to help us in this is the testimony of those who witnessed the presence of Christ with them after Easter. We read Paul's account in Acts, and we listen to Paul speak about the earliest experiences of the followers in 1 Corinthians. We hear Peter's voice. Everyone is an amateur when it comes to making sense of the resurrection. Yes, including your most learned theologians and highly educated pastors, like myself, of course. We can't work our way to it through our human thought, through our intellect, or our experience. Resurrection must work its way toward us in the same way that the risen Christ came to Mary Magdalene in the garden by the tomb. Easter this year comes at a time of enforced separation. It comes when we are concerned with worldly ills and fears and anxiety. In these last weeks, when the Final Four should have been played out in basketball, when the first games of baseball should be on, when the Olympic athletes, along with so many professional athletes, have been preparing themselves physically, mentally, and emotionally, they and we have all put expectations. All these things we look forward to in events aside, it's all put aside to cope with the reality of sickness and death. We'd like to think with our intellect, our drive, our can-do attitude, we can overcome anything. But death reality rears its head. We do our best. But here is something in the midst of these times that does not arise from within us. It does not arise within us, nor from the aspirations and hard work that we do, nor from our own intellect and can-do attitude. Rather, here is something strange and wonderful that comes to us as a gift. Here is something that God does rather than something we do. In the last few weeks, I was thinking of this Easter season. What I would say, I thought of the Worthley family and the death of Debbie. And so many of you have had family friends or families lost, as have I. And the light of truth that came to me this morning, this morning's story, the resurrection story, is our answer in the face of death itself. We read the Easter accounts in the Gospels, and the answer is in the story. Conventional, benign humanism wilts before all victorious death. Stoicism nobly attempts to stiff upper lip. Death undoes even the brightest attempts at godless reassurance. William Willimon wrote about this, about when he was chaplain at Duke University, trying to offer consolation to bright-minded mourners after a death. He says, I have marveled at the ineptitude of otherwise intelligent people bungled dealings with death. She will live on in her memory, people say. I like to think that he has become energy released into the atmosphere. These are the same people, he says, who accuse religious people of goofiness. An old pastor was asked, what do you miss most about ministry? Funerals, he replied. I know I'll miss more than funerals when I'm done, but I think I understand his reply. To a world whose philosophies fall apart when with the loss of a loved one, folks are forced to be theologians with hardly any theological resources, we who have faith, filled with the resurrection truth, have something to offer. And in our text this morning, Mary, a marginalized person looked down upon by a patriarchal society, seen as a problem to a world that abhors weakness or defects, Mary becomes the herald of Christ's resurrection. In her grief and loss, she hears the voice once more, the voice of her Lord, as the very Son of God comes near to her with outstretched, open-handed love. Even after the cries of crucify him echo in the culture of our living, even after being tortured by rulers who are egged on by religious leaders, Jesus comes to us. He doesn't just live in our memories. He won't simply be an inspiring moral example. Death has done its worst, and in spite of the limits of our human reason, in the face of death and hurt, resurrection comes to us. Do you see? Mary's story could be your story. From the margins from out of our past, come the gospel word to you this morning. The risen Christ doesn't wait for you to make sense of him. He comes to you. He calls you by name, and he gives you what you need. We hear his voice again, and we join the Easter chorus in unexpected joy. All hail the power of Jesus' name. Men and angels in mingled chorus give voice to a truth that defies death and delivers life and ushers eternity into our thoughts and our being. No matter the darkness, no matter the fear, no matter the situations of any moment that we are living within, Jesus calls us by name, and all the wonders of life that we see around us in springtime speak of the affirmation of love incarnate. The promise is given to you and to me. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. My benediction to you this day. May the wonder of that morning long ago be an ever-present reality as we live our days. May you experience resurrection in your thoughts, in your daily experiences, at work and at play, in the joy of relationships nurtured and cherished. These things are of God, and we are created for these. I will say, bless each of you, and all of you, in the name of the risen Christ. Go forth this day. You've heard the good news of the gospel. We go to proclaim it. Happy Easter.